live in a world where conflict no longer stays within borders. It doesn't respect geography, it doesn't distinguish between military and civilian, and it certainly doesn't give businesses a warning before it arrives. And what we're seeing with the Iran conflict right now is exactly that. It hasn't stayed in the region. It's showing up in energy supplies, financial systems, hospitals, communication networks, places that affect real people and real businesses every single day. And what's so significant about where we are today is that when this conflict escalated the way it did, it caught almost everyone off guard. It was unprecedented. Nobody wanted this. Nobody expected it to go this far. And people were just going about their lives. Businesses were operating as normal, and suddenly there was this wave of confusion and uncertainty about what was happening and what it actually meant for them. It's that human side of it, that complete lack of preparation and readiness that I think gets lost in a lot of these conversations. Joining us now to help make sense of all of this is James Blake, VP of Global Cyber Resiliency Strategy at Cohesity, someone who thinks about exactly these kinds of threats every single day. James, from where you sit, how are businesses actually handling this right now, and what are the real struggles you're seeing?
Well, I'm going to say something which probably sounds very strange, and that's ransomware was already a huge problem to businesses in a board level conversation, and people haven't managed to build resilience to that, as the headlines show you as well. So this is yet another driver for organizations to really bite the bullet, and to build resiliency requires a board level conversation, right? Not just an edict. The business needs to focus on what to recover, in what order, and face the fact it can't recover everything immediately, right? And these are difficult conversations, and a lot of companies are not having them, right? And hopefully this increased demand for resilience that's being driven by geopolitical situations being built on top of the criminal demands already will drive businesses to take this seriously, right? It's not a technology problem. Technology helps. This is a business problem. It's an operational resiliency problem. So that's what I generally see in conversations. A lot of board level edicts being issued and demands, but they don't really understand how difficult a problem this is in many organizations to move from where they are today to one where they're actually resilient.
Yeah, that's really true. James, let's talk about wiper attacks because I think this is where the conversation gets really serious. Most people have heard ransomware, as you mentioned before. You get hit, someone wants money. There's at least a process to it. Wiper attacks are like a completely different thing. There's no negotiation, no demand. The whole point is to like wipe your systems out completely and leave you with nothing to work with. And what's alarming is that these aren't just being used in active war zones anymore. So, from your perspective, why are wipe attacks the tool of choice here? And what makes them so particularly destructive for businesses? And how should they watch out for them?
Oh, that's a very big question. Yeah, I think if we look at why they're being chosen, right? They're another part of statecraft, right? Regardless of whether you align with the views of the countries, the political views of the countries that are using them, they are just another tool of statecraft, warfare, and everything else. And typically, states use everything at their disposal for their own advantage, right? And especially as some states get more and more isolated and contained, they revert to using tools that are potentially more and more destructive. But if you look at, particularly the Iranian situation, it's not new. If you go back to incidents I've dealt with in the past, the Shamoon attacks on Saudi Arabia, this is not new. This is over 10 years old, this methodology. And we saw an uptick in wiper attacks after the invasion in Ukraine as well, like a massive exponential increase in the amount of different wiper strains that there were. So I think, there's two elements there, right? This has just become the norm. We talked about cyber warfare for 40 years. as if it's going to be this almost nuclear escalation. What's actually happened is it's gradually become more and more adopted and just a part of the background noise that we're hearing. The challenge is it's not background noise to the organizations that get hit. And you mentioned the difference between criminal ecosystems and ransomware attacks, and then also nation state wiper attacks. That kind of suddenly starts blurring where we look at things like NotPetya, which was a wiper attack dressed up as a ransomware attack. So you can do false flag, not me, nothing to see here. But that had impact across the globe, right? Like, so wiper attacks, unless you really, really specifically target them, there is a risk they're going to impact every organization. So that's the first thing, right? Just unexpected spread and collateral damage is very real. And we saw that with NotPetya. The second thing is proxies, right? Like, you no longer want to just harm a government, you want to harm a whole economy of a country, right? You want to, it's the same with disinformation and information warfare. You want to sow chaos, you want to sow panic and things like that. And wiper attacks are a way of doing that. If you don't trust your bank, you don't trust your hospital, you don't trust your transport system, you don't trust your utilities, it creates panic in people. And that is often the aim of a foreign adversary that is trying to gain an advantage.
Yeah, exactly. James, let's talk about what good preparation actually looks like amidst of this. I think this is where a lot of organizations genuinely struggle. And what's interesting in that so much of the conversation about cybersecurity, as you mentioned, like focuses on technology, the tools, the systems, the software, but time and time again, what we hear is that the human side of it is just as important, if not more so. So, when you're working with organizations, what does good security preparedness actually look like in practice? And what are the things that separate the businesses that handle these situations well from the ones that don't?
I think there's two elements to this, the most important. You mentioned the human factor, right? And the human factor is usually misunderstood because it's, humans are driving your incident response. Right? If it's the first time they've dealt with an incident that is this stressful, and people massively misunderstand how stressful wiper and ransomware incidents are, like BCDR incidents, and everyone moans about the P1 incident they had with a system that went down because of power failure or equipment failure, and that's a panic. When you have no phones, you have no playbooks, you have no email, you have regulators calling you, executives calling you, you have all sorts of things you've been recommending the business do for the last 4 years that have come back to bite them, right? So often I see people quit in the middle of an incident. Right, like the person I'm dealing with, my team, we dealt with hundreds of ransomware and wiper incidents over the couple of years with our customer, my response team. And we're talking to someone, they're not there in the business the next day. And because of the lack of preparedness, no one has codified that person's knowledge, right? It's their actual incident response capability is built on tacit knowledge that sits in one person's brain. And either they leave the business, and it's a revolving door in cybersecurity largely a lot of the time, and that knowledge goes out with them, or they rage quit in the middle of an incident because they didn't sign up for this. And then that causes a huge problem. So making sure you've got those processes codified, those decision gates as you go from investigation to remediation to recovery is really, really, really important, right? So the human element, both getting people to experience what a real incident is like, and a tabletop does not do that, right? A real drill where you're building muscle memory, absolutely critical, right? A drill that doesn't just involve executives, it involves the operational teams working together, having handoff points and everything else. That is what builds true resilience. And then, so that human element is there. The second human element of it is the impact, right? And people forget that, in a typical ransomware attack, for instance, emails are stolen and people are threatening either customers or senior executives, right? Because they know where their daughters go to school. I saw this in an incident and they threatened to kidnap the daughter, right? Creates chaos, panic, and that's what a lot of the nation state actors want to do. The second thing after the people element is preparedness, right? You've covered it already. And understanding that you can't recover all the systems at the same time. What's my minimum viable company to keep people safe, to achieve my contractual and regulatory obligations that I have? And then there's a gradual, more and more decreasing tiers of applications that we need to bring back. And I think most business impact analysis, everyone thinks their application is the most important, right? And we need to grasp this concept of a minimum viable company. And when you come to recover, especially with nation state actors, their persistence mechanisms are very deep, right? So I'm used to smash and grab ransomware actors, like ransomware as a service, tends to be dwell times of 1 to 5 days. Targeted ransomware, dwell times of 60 to 100 days. Nation state actors, the ones I've dealt with, hundreds of days, years, right? All of your backups have persistence mechanisms in them, like as far as your retention period is. And then the whole mechanism for recovering after that kind of loss of trust that can be in identities, in network layers, in configurations, applications, operating systems, not just the data that's been wiped. Most people don't have a structure to rebuild that trust bottom upwards. They miss something, recover, get hit again, right? Because persistence is a key word in advanced persistent threat.
So, James, what are the practical guidances that you can give to especially organizations and businesses in the current cyber warfare scenarios?
Well, I said you need to build resilience. What does that actually look like? Like, what are the major steps? So if we look at all sorts of destructive cyber attacks, backups are targeted, right? So backups are your last line of defense, right? If you don't have backups, then all bets are off, right? Your business is wiped off the face of the earth. So we know both ransomware gangs and nation state actors are very adept at targeting those backup infrastructures. So vault your backup infrastructure, make it immutable so they cannot change it once it's written. Make sure you got separation of duties, strong authentication, all of these kinds of things, right? Because if your backup's gone, you've got no resilience, right? It's the fundamental. Then sometimes people forget there is a difference between business continuity and disaster recovery and cyber incidents, right? And unfortunately, that's forgotten because a lot of the people leading cyber recovery are the same people that lead flood, fire, misconfiguration, power loss, equipment failure attacks, scenarios. And so in a cyber attack, it's not, recovery is about restoring data, right? A cyber resilience is about restoring trust, and that is very different, right? So having a mechanism, an environment that's isolated that allows you to either rebuild systems to a trusted state or recover the elements of various different snapshots that don't have persistence to remove the attack surface. And we look at ourselves, a third of the attacks we see are coming through vulnerabilities. If you recover a vulnerable system, it's just going to be attacked by the nation state again once you've recovered it, right? If you recover a malicious account, a Trojanized binary, a GPO object in Active Directory, you've just recovered the attack, right? And the beachhead. So those are really critical, right? And most people create a clean room environment. But the most important thing on top of all of that is different people are involved, right? I already mentioned line of business. Line of business own the ultimate recovery and risk to their systems. If you get stuck in perfection paralysis, where you're trying to remove all risk, you're causing damage to the business because you can't deliver products, services, or mission, right? So there needs to be a balance at some point in time where security go, right, I've got a good understanding of what's happened. They hand it to IT that remediate the threats, and then line of business makes a decision on repatriating that system. If those relationships and shared responsibility model is set up in advance, those decision gates it's really smooth. And if you've done a drill, not a tabletop exercise, which tends to be quite theoretical and only involves senior executives, you've actually tested people, process, and technology. You can continually improve because you identify your weaknesses in those three areas. But the most important thing is muscle memory, right? Your staff know what the handoff point is, who they need to communicate with, and things like that. And that muscle memory, when you get hit with the duress of an incident, it's one of the reasons I have no hair. I deal with hundreds of incidents a year, right? And they are stressful for customers, right? And the more you breed familiarity and knowing exactly what to do, when that eventual cyber attack, be it nation state or a criminal actor, it will be water off a duck's back, right? You will be able to handle it calmly, consistently, and in a way that's efficient and effective. So, they're kind of my key takeaways for building that resilience.
James, we cannot have this conversation without talking about AI because it is really changing everything about how these attacks are carried out. And what's really striking, it's not that it's just making attacks faster, it's making them smarter, more targeted. And attackers can now scan networks, find weaknesses, move through systems, sometimes without any human involvement at all. So my question to you is, how much has AI has actually shifted the balance between the attacker and defender? And are businesses actually keeping up with this?
Yeah, so AI always is a double-edged sword, right? So analysts' effectiveness inside of security operations centers has no doubtedly gone up, right? Because of AI, because of classification. And I cut my teeth. My university degree is in machine learning back in 1990, right? We just called it statistics back then, not AI. And multi-vector AI models have exponentially increased our capability there. I think the most important thing is I have a very considered view on AI, and it's largely aligned to what you just said. And that is the fact that it's increased the cadence and the speed, efficiency, and effectiveness of attacks, right? That's what it's done. It's not created new types of attack.
James, for our final question, I want to zoom out a little bit because I think it's important to look at the bigger picture here. Cyber warfare used to be something that felt quite abstract, something that happened in the background, something most people never really saw or felt. But where we are now feels fundamentally different. The lines between the military and civilian, like I mentioned before, between war and everyday business operations have genuinely dissolved. And the Iran conflict is in many ways a live case study in what modern cyber warfare actually looks like. So, to close us out, in your view, is the what is the modern state of cyber warfare, and where do you think this is all heading?
Yeah, so I think, a lot of militaries and governments around the world have been trying to define a doctrine for cyber warfare. Like, where is it applicable? Like, what should, almost the UN convention on how we do cyber warfare, and that's been asked for over 10 years. And I think I've got some books over here on cyber warfare I was reading 15, 16 years ago. I think what we've got now is we have a technical capability, right? We have an over dependence on IT in any business. It doesn't matter what it is. And you see that when there's just a ransomware attack. I couldn't get on a plane the other day in Belgium because someone had attacked the seating and ticketing system that was there. So the impacts of IT attacks are greater than they've ever been. So even though cyber warfare has been around for a long time, its impacts are greater than it's ever been before. And especially when we start to look at the complex IT supply chains that we have, right? It's very easy to attack a common provider and impact lots of downstream systems, right? So cyber warfare has fundamentally not changed. There is no unifying doctrine for how it can be applied. And even if the UN came up with one, half of the countries wouldn't actually abide by it anyway, because we already have conventions on warfare which you can just look around the globe and they're not being adhered to by certain parties as well. So it's really important that we understand that context, right? That even if you're not aligned to a defense contractor or government, you may become collateral damage in these kinds of attacks. We need to build resilience to ransomware anyway. So if you do that well, you've got resilience to cyber warfare attacks as well. So that's my key takeaway there is cyber warfare is just the reality. There is no unifying governing strategy for how it can be applied or adopted across the world. Everyone is a potential target. Just build resilience. And it sounds easy, but start on that journey. Every progression you make in resilience reduces the impact of a potential wiper attack, right? You don't have to go from zero to perfection. It's just about reducing impact when it happens and start the journey as soon as possible.
So, James, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
I think that last one. I think it's we can't change the world, right? The Stoics have a very very wise saying: don't try and change everyone else. Change the things that you're in power of changing, right? And with cyber resilience, you're in control of your defensive space. Right, you own the battlefield because it's your company, right? We need to embrace the same automation, collaboration, and everything else that these attackers see. You look at the tradecraft, whether it's a criminal group or whether it's a government agency, they are determined to achieve their objectives. And sometimes in cyber resilience, we give up on the things that are hard, right? Like asset management, like properly discovering the interdependencies between our applications and not just applications, but underlying identity, network, and all these other things. We need to rebuild trust. And if we don't, the applications we put on top are built on sand, right? So we need to take that same persistent approach. We've got to do the things that are difficult, do them once, and then they're done. But if you try and focus on the things that are easy to do, you often forget the fundamentals. And in the customers, some of the customers I see that end up with weeks and months of impact, they're the ones that haven't gone through that preparation. Right? They've skipped the hard things to do, the hard conversations with line and business. I can't recover all of your applications immediately. You think they're the most important apps in the business, which really are the most important. Difficult conversation, not a technology conversation, not a security conversation. It's a business conversation. And that is sometimes missing from a lot of people's resilience conversations.
James, thank you so much. Really, this has been one of the conversations that I think a lot of people needed to hear. You've taken something that can feel really overwhelming and made it feel a little bit more manageable. And that's not easy to do. We really appreciate your time and your insights today. And to everyone watching, if you want to keep hearing experts from experts like James on topics that actually matter, make sure you hit subscribe, and we have plenty more conversations like this one coming up. And thanks for being with us, and we'll see you in the next one.